West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I could not live without champagne. In victory, I deserve it. In defeat, I need it. That is a quote from Winston Churchill, and it's from this 522-page book about Winston Churchill's illnesses. Nothing but his illnesses. The name of the book is Winston Churchill's Illnesses, written by two British physicians. The quote about champagne comes from the chapter titled, "Was Churchill an Alcoholic?" The book was published in 2020, and using all of the latest analysis about alcohol addiction, the authors conclude that Winston Churchill exhibited none of the traits of alcoholism, and that the image of Churchill as a very heavy drinker was much exaggerated, including by himself. A note, many close observers of the British Prime Minister, the book notes many close observers of the British Prime Minister saying things like this: "Personally, throughout the time I knew him, I never saw him the worse for drink. The glass of weak whiskey, like the cigars, was more a symbol than anything else. One glass lasted him for hours." Churchill himself once wrote, "I had been brought up and trained to have the utmost contempt for people who got drunk." So it turns out alcoholism was not one of Winston Churchill's many, many health problems. It contributed to this book. This book is filled with all of those health problems, and each chapter title describes a separate major health event in Winston Churchill's life. Chapter titles like chest pain during Christmas 1941 at the White House, pneumonia and atrial fibrillation in December 1943 in Carthage, and acute stroke in June 1953 in London. During all of those illnesses, including the stroke, Winston Churchill was serving as the now still widely regarded greatest British Prime Minister in history. A British Prime Minister who rallied his country to continue to fight Hitler when it seemed that all was lost. When he suffered an acute stroke, Prime Minister Churchill simply retreated to his country house for a few months. When he made his first public speeches after the stroke, Churchill worried that he wouldn't be able to stay standing through the speeches. But he did. And no one except his doctors and family and very closest staff knew that Winston Churchill had a stroke. His cabinet did not know that the Prime Minister had a stroke. When Churchill first mentioned the stroke publicly a year after he had that stroke, there was no controversy about it at all. Winston Churchill won World War II by strategizing with, sometimes side by side, the President of the United States, who served longer than any other president and whose health was never good. Franklin Delano Roosevelt once fell to the floor of his private railroad car, clutching his chest in agony in the company of only his son James, who he told he didn't think he was going to make it. He suffered unreported episodes that seemed like minor strokes. He was ill for long periods of time and left the White House for long periods of time to recuperate. Franklin Roosevelt lost the ability to walk or even stand up at the age of 39 when he was struck with polio. He had been a political rising star in New York, and many expected him to retire to the life of a country gentleman on his Hyde Park estate, paid for entirely by his mother, and never work again. But Franklin Roosevelt recovered to the point where he won 2 elections for governor of New York and then won 4 presidential elections in a row. And he did all of that in a wheelchair. He faked the ability to stand for the occasionally big speech, but he would be clinging to the podium with the arm strength that he worked so hard to build up so that he could hold himself up. And he would be pouring with sweat as he held himself up with all of his arm strength. And he worked his way through those rare standing speeches that way, pouring the kind of sweat that today's HD television cameras would pick up and dwell on, and perhaps make some observers say it was painful to watch. But Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill had the good fortune to serve as the highest elected officials in their countries long before television news could cover their every move and long before Twitter could have people pumping out their instant reactions to their public appearances. Franklin Delano Roosevelt believed that it would be painful to watch him being lifted in and out of a car by Secret Service agents, so he never allowed cameras to capture that. Elaborate steps were taken when his train would arrive or depart so that he could be transferred from the car to the train, lifted in and out, without anyone seeing and without anyone thinking that it was painful to watch. Kids grew up in America during the FDR presidency not knowing that the president could not walk. Caroline Morell was an 11-year-old growing up in Washington, D.C. when her father, a lawyer with connections to the Roosevelt administration, brought her to a reception at the White House where, with no cameras present, President Roosevelt was rolled into the East Room in his wheelchair. Caroline Morell's eyes widened. She tugged her father's sleeve and looked up and whispered, "I won't tell anyone." She felt she was in the presence of a secret about the president's condition, and she felt, as most Americans did, and as the press corps did way back then, that the president's condition should be respected. 11-year-old Caroline Morell did not think that in her one lucky moment of being in the room with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that he was painful to watch. Painful to watch quickly became an oft-repeated phrase on Twitter last night during the Pennsylvania Senate campaign debate because Democratic candidate John Fetterman suffered a stroke this spring and has not fully recovered 100% of his verbal fluency. Here is the first thing that he said in his debate with Republican Mehmet Oz.
I'm running to serve Pennsylvania. He's running to use Pennsylvania. Here's a man that spent more than $20 million of his own money to try to buy that seat. I'm also having to talk about something called the Oz rule, that if he's on TV, he's lying. He did that during his career on his TV show. He's done that during his campaign about lying about our record here. And he's also lying probably during this debate. And let's also talk about the elephant in the room. I had a stroke. He's never let me forget that. And I might miss some words during this debate. mush two words together, but it knocked me down, but I'm going to keep coming back up. And this campaign is all about, to me, is about fighting for everyone in Pennsylvania that ever got knocked down, that needs to get back up.
While he was brilliantly winning World War II, Franklin Roosevelt once fell asleep in the Oval Office in the middle of signing his name to a letter. That was not painful to watch because no one got to see that. The painful to watch reviews last night seemed oddly disconnected to this country's own experience with illness in elected office, including the experience of two members of the United States Senate who had strokes this year. Democratic Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico suffered a stroke in January. He took time off and eventually came back to work. Our first guest tonight, Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, suffered a stroke in May. He took time off and he came back to work. Senator Bernie Sanders had a heart attack 3 years ago when he was running for president, and he took time off and went back to work, not just as a United States Senator, but he went back to running for president. And people continued to vote for Bernie Sanders for president after he had a heart attack running for president. You don't have to reach all the way back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt to find serious health problems in the White House. In the 21st century, we had a vice president who had 4 heart attacks before he became vice president. Dick Cheney's first heart attack was when he was 37 years old. Vice President Cheney had a life-saving heart surgery in 2005 that, if it failed, would have made Republican House Speaker Dennis Hastert the next in line for the presidency. And years later, Dennis Hastert went to prison after confessing to the sexual abuse of high school kids when he was a high school wrestling coach. The Senate is a deliberative body. Senators never have to make quick, irreversible decisions. They can take their time and think about each vote they cast in the Senate, and they usually cast their votes in accordance with the positions they have taken in their campaigns. And so, as with all such debates, the only thing that really matters in what was said last night is how we can expect the candidates to vote in the Senate. And so far, only one campaign ad has been produced using the words of one of the candidates in last night's debate.
This is who Dr. Oz wants in charge of women's healthcare decisions.
I want women, doctors, local political leaders, local political leaders, local political leaders.
Oz would let politicians like Doug Mastriano ban abortion without exceptions, even in cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother. Oz is too extreme for Pennsylvania.
How painful was it to watch a physician who used to fully support every woman's right to make their own reproductive choices say last night, in the hope of winning Donald Trump's voters in Pennsylvania, that what he called local political leaders should be making that choice for women? How painful was that to watch?
It is Thursday, the 27th of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya. A little bit of spice in your life, indeed. How are you? Well, here we are on a Thursday, and oh, you know what? I forgot to mention in previous Thursdays on Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, if you go to, if you follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, you can have a quick way to get to my Daily Co's page, where I post the diaries for each of these shows, including the Sunday show under the moniker The Justice Department Music Sound Frontier. Oh yeah, got the playlist there. Links to be able to listen to that. But nonetheless, for West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on Thursdays, I do have my variation on shrimp and grits. which is actually the basis would be known as the Charleston style of shrimp and grits, which I had in New Orleans, and they bumped it up. Yeah, like Emerald Lagasse, like bam. And by adding a few Cajun spices. And so I took that experience in New Orleans with Charleston shrimp and grits and then, tweaked it even more so you can call it my own. You can call it Justice Putnam's variation. And I do too, because it is. Anyway, truth be told, everything has a basis, and it is, I think technically one might consider it to be the Charleston style, except it's been, bam. Okay, got that out of the way. How are you? 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. The countdown to fascism, as if it's not already here. See, we're just getting sort of primed for it so that we can get used to it when it's really instituted. I don't know. I don't really trust these people to not do what they keep saying they're going to do. Because we're acting like, it's all play acting. It's all just like campaign rhetoric. That they're going to hog tie people and put them up against a rock pile is pretty much what they're saying. God, they're going to even go after Fauci. Kamala Harris, they're gonna put her under a tribunal, and I don't know, they're going to impeach everybody. We're going to impeach Mary Garland for going after Donald Trump for stealing state secrets and selling it to whoever is the highest bidder. Nuke secrets to the Sauds, and they don't bat an eye. Hey, if Trump did it, it's okay. I want to know where in the Constitution it said that if Trump does it, it's not a crime. Okay? I would just see. Hey. Is this all get back because we wouldn't let Bork sit on the Supreme Court? I wonder sometimes, because they sure went hog wild, right, when we said Bork, the guy that fired people in the midst of an investigation against a president who was committing crimes. Yeah. Well, the crooks always say, if someone comes after you, you go after them 10 times worse. If someone slaps you, you slap them 10 times worse. And I guess this is the 10 times worse that we're experiencing. I don't know. Maybe in the market of things, fascism sells, obviously, and liberal democracy doesn't. It's just not a moneymaker. Only fascism sells, I guess. I don't know. To me, it seems like market manipulation then, wouldn't it? Does anybody like that? I guess if you're the one manipulating the market, you love it. And now we have a bunch of fascists manipulating everything, right down to counting votes. They can't really convince people in America that, we've just taken over. We're going to fake it like Putin, okay? And all those other weird autocrats that followed the Putin model. It'll look like you're voting for something and someone, but you're really only voting for one someone, okay? Just to be clear. Okay, and then any kind of regulation against that is considered to be, that's just partisan and political. You're trying to make this into a banana republic. No, we're trying to take it back to a United States American democracy and keep it from a Putin-esque model. Jeez. Want to make it into a banana republic. No, we want to make it back into America and make it great again. We don't want to be the Putin model. And what did Putin do? One of the first things he did, well, of course, use the Nazi model, and let's be clear about that as well, of using a nation's laws against themselves. Everything that the Nazis did was legal. And then after the Nazis took over, everything the Nazis did was legal. Before it was legal because, they were able to skirt the law, work on the edges. And then those edges became codified. What do we have right now? President, court president. Oh, hell no. Which is part of the Putin-esque model. Now, this theory might be supplanted by the fact that rich right-wing industrialists have been trying to pack the courts and have been packing the courts for decades and decades. And yes, we're talking about the Heritage Foundation, which are the Kochs, and the Federalist Society that Leonard Leo represents, for the nameless, faceless, rich industrialist burgermeister fascists that fund all of this, who really don't want the hoi polloi getting in the way when they're trying to get some money. Because money and all the other accoutrements of it equals power. And you don't negotiate with a machine. Okay? Workers, machines, you get my drift here. You put the machine to work, you turn it on, and if it starts to break down, well, you replace it if it can't be fixed. So the Putin-esque model, as I get back to this, is that corrupting the judiciary. So that you would have, in a sense, throughout all levels of their judiciary, the old Nazi People's Court. With, Friedlander, I think the guy? That was the guy? The original People's Court, not Wapner. It always made me like a little cautious about, we're going to watch the People's Court, because I was thinking of the Nazis' People's Court. Then you had a judge named Wapner. It's like, oh my God, is that who followed Friedlander? I guess so. Or was it Friesenlander? I have to look it up. I forget. I'm getting old. We all are. So, and we see this corruption in a sort of a, post-Soviet model. And when you get back to it, the Kochs, the Federalist Society, even Peterson, the Peterson Foundation, they all started having their rise, post-Watergate. But right before the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, when I say right before, I mean like 5 years or so before is when these groups started making their entreaties into American politics, at least in a more visible manner, or more visible than they had been before. But it's all dark money, and they're mostly faceless and nameless. When I say the Kochs, it's not just one of the Koch brothers is dead now, but the remaining Koch brother. They are just the face of the Heritage Foundation, and but they represent hundreds, if not more. I mean, they have a conference every year that's you can get your life not only threatened but maybe snuffed out if you move the wrong way at these meetups that sometimes they have in Palm Springs. Just saying. Reporters show up, and you could get hurt. You got to sort of make yourself look like you're part of the resort, client or worker. That's how it's done. Anyway, so this, what I call a fascist attempt to take over everything that's right and good in the United States of America, has been going on for quite a while. Now, I suppose you could also say that anything that would be considered civil rights, back in the day, the Birchers and the right-wingers all called it a communist plot to take over the United States of America. You're going to let those black people vote and have equal rights after everything we did to them? I think that's a big motivator, too. They always talk about crime. It's because of the crimes that they've committed they think are going to be perpetrated on them. Not realizing that sometimes, you just got to move on, right? And they don't want to move on. because they think they're going to be killed in their bed by all those people that we just really terrorized for so many generations. Oh my God, we can't let them have freedom. Okay. And we're supposed to reach across the aisle and say, can we be friends? Can we go to the church social and have an ice cream? Maybe like ice cream, apple pie a la mode. I like cherry pie a la mode, personally. Apple pie, I get kind of tired of apples. But, why can't we? Because I'll tell you why. They think that we are abject evil baby eater Jews. As if that's supposed to be a bad thing. I mean, I'm not talking about the baby eating. That's what they say. Oh my gosh, look at the time. We had a much longer clip up there at the top with Lawrence because I think it was rather important to address this issue of disability, et cetera, et cetera. Because do we live in the order of, I don't know, do I blame Leviticus? I don't know. Who do I blame in the midst of this? That if you have a disability, it means that you've been marked by God for some sort of sin. I don't know. I don't accept that. Never have accepted it. Except in our society, I come from a time where you had to hide your disabilities because if you walked around with a limp, that you could get fired from your job. You can't do a good job. Look at you. I had friends that had to hide the fact they had epilepsy. They were able to moderate it with the medication and whatnot. But they could be fired. Not because they were manning vehicles out on the highway. I'm just talking about they would not be hired because by dint of the fact that they had epilepsy, they must have some sort of cognitive disability. And I can't have somebody crunching numbers at a desk if they're not able to do that. And that was the belief. If you had some sort of disability, you had to hide it. But we don't live that way anymore. All right? We have cutouts in the damn sidewalk so people in wheelchairs can have equal access. What is wrong with that? Of course, all the people who fought against it are fighting against the fact that even John McCain had issues, and he was able to serve. No one questioned his cognitive abilities. But, as they say, give a fascist an inch and they're going to take a Nazi mile. And they always do. Okay, enough of that. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, Texas Republican Chip Roy attacked the Biden administration over a program to stop COVID vaccine lies. Yeah, Chip Roy doesn't want to. He wants the lies to continue. Facebook parent Meta was fined nearly $25 million, a record, by the way, for repeatedly and intentionally violating campaign finance disclosure law. Yeah, the law doesn't apply to them. Where did they get that? And 3 Maryland state police officers have filed a federal class action lawsuit alleging widespread racial discrimination at the agency. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Saudi oil giant Aramco unveiled a $1.5 billion greenwashing fund. You like that? Just ahead of next month's UN climate conference in Egypt. And the gas crunch has eased in Europe, but the respite might not last. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. burned up so much time, not only with the opening clip, but also with my exceedingly long rant. We're going to just maybe forego the usuals here and get into this first offering. But I should mention that thank you, Kelly, for doing everything that you do. And thank you, Tom, for doing everything that you do. And become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, please, because we need to pay our bills and we need your help. I know it seems like we always need your help, but it's the truth. Okay, it is. Anyway, let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is out of the American Independent by the great Oliver Willis. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is soliciting proposals for the development of a model to use in predicting the kinds of stories containing falsehoods about vaccination that would be most likely to gain traction with the public. In a grant notice posted on October 20th with the title, Developing a Public Health Tool to Predict the Virality of Vaccine Misinformation Narratives, HHS stated, the purpose of this notice of funding opportunity is to support research to develop a predictive forecasting model that identifies new or re-emerging misinformation narratives that are likely to disseminate widely and have a high potential for impact on vaccine confidence. Well, that's not writing concisely. The notice said that the estimated funding for the grant would be a measly $1 million. The department also noted that with the spread of vaccine misinformation, there are often negative public health consequences, citing as an example the spread of diseases that could have been prevented with vaccination. Despite the impact on public health and safety, the grant solicitation came under attack from Republican from Texas, Chip Roy. Roy told the conservative Fox News that the grant proposal proves the CDC is rolling full steam ahead with their censorship campaign against citizens who speak up. He's talking about anti-vaxxers speaking up. This new scheme to use taxpayer money intended to further scientific inquiry is instead stifle researchers and anyone who dares dissent from the Biden administration's ever-changing COVID narrative is unsurprising and unacceptable. Yeah, Roy. My God, these guys. Now, Roy added, the CDC has no business trying to predict future thought crimes, nor, as they've done in the past, leverage their power to collude with big tech companies against the American people. Notice how it's always projection with them. Roy himself is among those who have been promoting lies about coronavirus and vaccination since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. In February, Roy responded to pharmaceutical company Pfizer's request that the Food and Drug Administration authorize the use of the COVID-19 vaccine for children under the age of 5, literally using the force of government and the culture of fear to jab children under 5 with zero basis in science to make billions of dollars. Shameful at Pfizer, he tweeted. His statement was analyzed by a PolitiFact fact-checker at the Austin American-Statesman, who rated Roy's claim a pants-on-fire lie. The fact-checker noted that the urgency behind the push to vaccinate children stems from the effect of the Omicron variant and its transmissibility, and that without vaccination, children could become ill themselves or pass the virus on to others, and then people die. But they deny all of that is happening. We had a measles outbreak here in the beginning of the Trump administration from anti-vaxxers who have been working for quite some time. You know, this is not anything new, but now it's I don't know, it's been hulkified, I guess. Hulkified? In June, now the fact-checker also noted that the development and production of Pfizer's vaccine was, quote, based on science, end quote, throughout the entire process, as would be the decision to authorize use for children. In June, the CDC recommended the vaccine for children between the ages of 6 months and 5 years, noting the vaccines had undergone the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. Studies have shown a correlation between misinformation about vaccines and slower rates of vaccination. Scholars at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich and the University of Basel published research on October 7 and concluded, we find that in the earlier stages of the vaccine rollout, starting on May of 2021, higher local viewership of Fox News channels has been associated with lower local vaccination rates, end quote. But the researchers did not find the same effect for people who watched CNN or MSNBC. Gene Johnson of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Washington state judge yesterday, Wednesday, fined Facebook parent company Meta nearly $25 million for repeatedly and intentionally violating campaign finance disclosure law in what is believed to be the largest campaign finance penalty in U.S. history. The penalty issued by King County Superior Court Judge Douglas North was the maximum allowed for more than 800 violations of Washington's Fair Campaign Practices Act, passed by voters in 1972 and later strengthened by the legislature. Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson argued that the maximum was appropriate, considering his office previously sued Facebook in 2018 for violating the same law. Meta, based in Menlo Park, California, did not immediately respond to an email seeking comment because everybody's having fun in the Meta universe where they don't have any legs. Washington's transparency law requires ad sellers, such as Meta, to keep and make public the names and addresses of those who buy political ads, the target of such ads, how the ads were paid for, and the total number of views of each ad. Ad sellers must provide the information to anyone who asks for it. Television stations and newspapers have complied with the law for decades, but Meta has repeatedly objected to the requirements, arguing unsuccessfully in court that the law is unconstitutional because it, quote, unduly burdens political speech and is virtually impossible to fully comply with. Yeah, the virtual world maybe, but in the real world you better. While Facebook does keep an archive of political ads that run on the platform, the archive does not disclose all the information required under Washington's law. I have one word for Facebook's conduct in this case: arrogance, Ferguson said in a news release. It intentionally disregarded Washington's election transparency laws, but that was not enough. Facebook argued in court that those laws should be declared unconstitutional. That's breathtaking. Where is the corporate responsibility? that the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. 3 Maryland state police officers have filed a proposed federal class action lawsuit against the department, alleging widespread racial discrimination in the agency. The lawsuit, filed on Monday in U.S. District Court in Greenbelt, alleges that the state police disciplines officers of color more harshly than white officers. The 36-page complaint alleges that the state police agency, or MSP, also denied promotions and retaliated against officers of color who spoke out against how they are treated. It also alleges that the agency maintained a hostile work environment by subjecting officers of color to racist comments and symbols, such as using a paper training dummy at a MSP shooting range with a black face and afro wig for officers to shoot at. The force is currently under investigation. The U.S. Department of Justice announced in July that it was conducting a probe of whether the agency's hiring and promotion practices are racially discriminatory. The lawsuit proposes a class made up of officers of color who were disciplined, denied promotions, or otherwise discriminated against from October 2019 to the present day. A judge would have to approve the group before the lawsuit could move forward as a class action litigation. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Fiona Samuels. The red wolf once roamed a huge swath of the eastern United States. The historic range of these rust-colored canines stretched from Long Island across to Missouri and down to the Texas-Mexico border. But by 1972, the population was reduced to only roaming a small area along the Gulf Coast due to habitat loss and hunting. To conserve the species, 14 individuals were captured as part of a breeding program. In 1980, their wild relatives were declared extinct. The captured wolves were all that was left.
The species has gone through this huge bottleneck, and through that lost a lot of genetic variation. And now there's a fair amount of inbreeding in the species because you can't help it when you have so few founders.
That's Kristen Bresky, an assistant professor at Michigan Technological University whose research focuses on the conservation of genetics of wild animal populations.
I think what captures the imagination with the red wolf, and I think this work, is it's been the underdog. It's been the underdog scientifically. It's been the underdog for conservation. It was, all wolves were heavily persecuted, but the red wolves were heavily persecuted to the point that only 14 were left.
Now, Bresky and her collaborators have found a surprising new pool of red wolf genes that might help bring more diversity to the tiny population. Ghost alleles in wild coyote populations. Alleles are the parts of chromosomes that encode specific genetic traits. Just like humans, canines inherit one allele from each parent for a certain gene. But why are these called ghost alleles?
So the ghost part is the red wolves are gone, and we presumed they took all of their genes with them. But what we also have to remember is when a population is dying out, it might find the best mate is the next closest related species. So a red wolf and a coyote can have offspring. Maybe the red wolf dies because that's what's been happening for red wolves. But all of those genes that it just passed on to its coyote hybrid offspring now get to circulate, and we've rediscovered those.
Bridget von Holt, who you just heard, is a collaborator working with Bresky. Together, they found that some coyote populations in Louisiana and Texas, who were protected from hunting, still retain huge amounts of red wolf genes. Some individuals are almost 60% wolf. As red wolves are released back into the wild, breeding with these coyotes could help the critically endangered species regain some of its genetic diversity. That's almost like going back in time and undoing the genetic bottleneck from 1980, making the new red wolf population more genetically diverse.
This would be kind of the opposite direction, taking the small, isolated, inbred population from the captive breeding program, but still has red wolf genes that are so critical, and put them into a wild landscape with new genetic variation that they haven't seen for 50 years or more. And all of a sudden, hopefully this is like a super mix of genetic health and sort of a rebound that these animals can be wild and be themselves again.
The next steps will include how to release red wolves in a way that takes advantage of the ghost alleles hiding in the coyote populations. Like with other wolf releasing efforts, there might be some pushback.
There will be controversy. There will be people who aren't happy, but there are people that are and are incredibly supportive. And I think also at the end of the day, there's a philosophy that we created this problem. We're responsible for fixing it.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Fiona Samuels.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
What is Question 4? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Last July, the Massachusetts legislature overwhelmingly voted for the Work and Family Mobility Act, a law that allows qualified Massachusetts residents to apply for a driver's license regardless of their immigration status. Before driving, the law requires the license applicant to be trained, tested, licensed, and insured. The law will allow immigrants without status to make essential trips to work, to get their kids to school, to medical appointments, and to the grocery store. Similar laws already exist in 17 other states, many of which have experienced measurable improvements in road safety. After all, in case of an accident, it's important that all parties have insurance and proper identification. One reason this law, this public safety measure, is supported by a majority of district attorneys and sheriffs and major city police chiefs. But after the law passed, an opposition group gathered enough signatures to put the issue on the ballot this November. The fourth question on the ballot is, should the law be retained? Please don't be confused by the wording of Question 4. Voting yes will keep the law in place. And remember to turn the ballot to the back. That's where Question 4 is printed. That's where you can vote in favor of both human rights and public safety by voting yes on Question 4. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1951. That was the day that the United Negro Labor Council held its founding convention. African American workers had made significant gains in the American workforce during World War II. The National March on Washington movement, led by A. Philip Randolph, had led President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to sign an executive order desegregating war industry jobs. But as the war ended, these gains slowed, and in some cases were even reversed. In 1950, 900 African Americans gathered in Chicago to discuss the problem. They decided to form a new organization, specifically focused on issues of black employment. By the next year, 23 chapters of the United Negro Labor Council had been established throughout the country. More than 1,000 white and black labor activists attended that first convention in Cincinnati. 1/3 of the attendees were women. One of the first goals established by the organization was to get fair employment practice clauses into every union contract. The first person to speak at the convention was Vicki Garvin, one of the convention's lead planners. She declared, "We are making history today." But that history was cut short. The National Negro Labor Council faced accusations from the mainstream labor movement that it was a communist front. One of the organization's leaders, Coleman Young, was brought before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Young had worked for Ford prior to World War II, but lost his job due to his union activity. He fought in World War II as one of the Tuskegee Airmen. Coleman refused to give testimony against his fellow National Negro Labor Council members. Young would eventually go on to become the first black mayor of Detroit. But the National Negro Labor Council would be dissolved by the Red Scare, dissolving in 1956. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 37 degrees Fahrenheit, still under an active frost warning for, well, areas that are a bit shadier than where we are here at the mothership. Under foggy conditions as well, and looks like we should have some sun and clouds mixed, and we will be much warmer today. It looks like we'll be in the mid-60s, winds light and variable. Cloudy overnight with lows in the mid-30s. Winds light and variable, continuing with that frost advisory. And then considerable clouds early with a small chance of rain in the morning. Some decrease in clouds later in the day with highs once again in the mid-60s. Winds light and variable. Ragweed pollen is rated low right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good, and it's gone down even lower. It's at 19 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.21 inches. Visibility is at 1 1/2 mile. And relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 68 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 72 and sunny. Rome is 80 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 55 and cloudy. Kabul is 54 and clear. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 54 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 68 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and fair, and New York, New York is 62 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous staff at the Associated Press, and who can blame them, bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Saudi oil and gas company Aramco unveiled a $1.5 billion fund yesterday, Wednesday, for sustainable investments, which is just a nice way of saying they're greenwashing. Part of efforts to burnish the state-owned company's green credentials in an announcement ahead of the UN climate conference next month in Egypt. Aramco CEO Ayman Nasser said at an investment conference in Saudi Arabia that the fund will focus on, quote, breakthrough technologies that are important and startups that will help us address climate change, end quote. Nasser billed the fund as one of the world's biggest sustainability-focused venture capital funds, he means a greenwashing fund, and said it would invest globally and launch immediately. He spoke at Saudi Arabia's Future Investment Initiative meeting, sometimes known as Davos in the Desert, a comparison to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting of corporate bigwigs and world leaders in the Swiss Alps. Aramco is one of the largest corporate greenhouse gas emitters. Environmentalists have long accused oil and gas companies of using climate-friendly pledges to greenwash their polluting activities.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mais automne, quand les feuilles tombent partout, si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
David McHugh of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Natural gas and electricity prices in Europe have plunged from summer peaks thanks to mild weather and a months-long scramble to fill gas storage ahead of winter and replace Russian supplies during the war in Ukraine. It is a welcome respite after Russia slashed natural gas flows, triggering an energy crisis that has fueled record inflation and a looming recession. Yet experts warn it is too soon to exhale, even as European governments roll out relief packages for people struggling with high utility bills and work on longer-term ways to contain volatile gas and electricity prices that have shrunk household budgets and forced some businesses to shut down. Persistent unknowns are leaving energy-intensive businesses jittery. They are appealing to governments to help them and their customers weather the energy storm so that disruptions in supplies of everything from glass to plastics to clean hospital sheets do not cascade through the economy. Though Europe's underground storage is getting filled at 94% overall compared to 77% at this time last year, Germany, once heavily dependent on Russian gas, has filled storage to 97% of capacity, France to 99%, and Belgium and Portugal both at 100%. That was achieved by importing record quantities of liquefied natural gas, which comes from ship from the U.S. and Qatar, instead of by pipeline from Russia, and by increasing pipeline supplies from Norway and Azerbaijan. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, and you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.